Mr. Trump has declared that he is going to make it he is going to pass an order where the birth on U.S. land by any legal immigrants, irrespective of the status. For example, any temporary status or visitor visa status, or you can say as long as they are not citizens. I think if they are already green card holders, then also by birth, in my opinion, eh, the child is not going to be citizen just by the virtue of birth on the American soil. Now, for example, if the people are on the study permit, work permit, or on the visitor visa, which are a temporary resident status, what we call, like normally it's a work permit is a temporary. So all these three, or any other category. For example, um, a refugee under consideration. Still, person is not like a refuge citizen or legalized refuge, but under consideration, and then there is a childbirth of the couple. Or, for example, the couple is not married and under common law relationship, immigration status is like a temporary, for example, as I told you, work permit or student visa or any visitor visa. So, as long as, so what Mr. Trump is trying to do is that the birth of a child on American soil depends on the status of the parents. And another meaning, what I understand, is that even, for example, the husband and wife have child born on the American soil, it will take, and both are citizens. Again, child will take another 5 years or whatever the mandatory period to be citizen takes. Birth, a child will also take the same period of time to become a citizen. In the overall scenario, anything unconstitutional, yes, will be challenged by any person in USA in the Supreme Court under judicial review. And if any law, act, or enactment which violates any constitutional amendment or constitutional provision, then that particular act or any amendment will be considered as unconstitutional and will be struck down by the Supreme Court. Supreme Court has that power under judicial review. And every in democratic country, all the Supreme Court means Supreme Court of the country and other and the high courts have this power of judicial review. And judicial review power is what you call that any act in violation of constitutional provision is unconstitutional and therefore must be struck down. So sometimes any constitutional amendment changing the constitution drastically, changing the nature of the constitution, challenging the basic structure of the constitution, then again it can be struck down. Otherwise, a constitutional amendment will come into effect, will change the constitution to that effect, changing the, like in accordance with the socio-economic change, because world is changing, so sometimes, but it cannot change the basic nature. And what is the basic nature of the constitution? Only the Supreme Court can decide. So Supreme Court has two power to determine the basic structure of the constitution, that is the basic bricks that must not be shaken, and number two, judicial review power. So Supreme Court is ultimately the protector of the democracy, but government has a right to make constitutional amendment, provided that it must not touch the basic structure of the constitution. So at the most, even Supreme Court may strike down any provision uh, as unconstitutional and will not come into effect. But if there is a constitutional amendment, and after that, if that law has a retroactive effect, it will come into effect. So, depending upon like who is affected and whether they want to challenge uh, into the Supreme Court, because certain laws can be called in question. So it all depends upon the affected group. It is a group action. So let us see from here onwards, because in Constitution there are three wings of the Constitution. That is what we call executive, which is normally the president. Like for example, in India, the prime minister and the ministers, and the legislature means backbenchers, so member of parliament, and then the judiciary means Supreme Court, High Courts, and subordinate courts. So this is Supreme Court is supreme in the name of Supreme Court of India. For example, it is India, Supreme Court of India. Similarly, Supreme Court is supreme. Actually, this is an apex court. Apex court means there is no higher authority than apex court in the field of judiciary. And judiciary is the third wing of the Constitution. But judiciary is not the third house of the parliament, because normally it is upper house and the lower house of parliament. In Canada and USA also, I think that it is a House of Commons and Senate. So, but because judiciary only can determine the question of fact and question of law, apart from that, it protects the basic structure of the Constitution. So, must be in conformity. Every act, law, or any regulation must be in conformity with the Constitution. And if it is not, then there must be a constitutional amendment. And if the constitutional amendment affects the basic structure, then that constitutional amendment will be also struck down by the Supreme Court. So this is what I learned, and this is what I understand.